Now, we are now joined by NPR editor Mujibur Rahman from Washington, D.C. to discuss the recent military operations conducted by the U.S. forces in Venezuela. Welcome to Pakistan TV, sir.
Thank you for having me.
So, President Trump has stated that the United States will run Venezuela until a safe, proper, and judicious transition occurs. What does this actually mean in practical terms?
Thank you again, and hello to and good morning to your listeners and viewers. Well, in practical terms, it reflects the U.S. president's intent that the United States will take direct control of the governance of Venezuela immediately following the capture of Nicolas Maduro. Um, Trump said the U.S. will run the country. This means U.S. authorities, including military, diplomatic, and administrative personnel, would oversee the country's key institutions and functions, effectively acting as the governing authority. Now, Trump's comments did not rule out U.S. troops on the ground, and in fact, he signaled the willingness to use military force to maintain this governance or intervene further if needed. And on top of governance, Trump indicated very clearly U.S. oil companies would invest and, quote, rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure, making economic interest as a central part of this transition plan. So, but it lacks clear timeline or legal structure. They have not outlined how long this period will last, how leadership will be determined, or what legal framework will govern this transition. So, in short, rather than merely supporting democratic change from the outside, this approach involves direct U.S. administration and authority over Venezuelan state functions until a new government is put in place. And we don't know what kind of government that will be and who will be. But it looks like they are talking to some groups there. And in a few days, we will have a more clearer picture of who they are.
So, the government is technically toppled. So, what are the risks of prolonged instability or civil conflict inside Venezuela following Maduro's removal?
Well, that's a very key question, and let's not forget, it's not going to be a walk in the park, because removing an entrenched authoritarian leader, especially through external military action, it creates a number of serious risks for Venezuelan internal stability. I mean, his removal doesn't eliminate all regime loyalists. They're still there. And the elements of the military, security forces, or local power brokers, organized crime groups, they could resist a foreign-backed transition or assert their own power. Now, Venezuela has very powerful armed groups that could exploit the situation and the instability for territorial control. External actors opposed to the U.S. presence might also offer support to insurgents. Many Venezuelans view foreign military intervention as a violation of national sovereignty. This can fuel nationalist resistance or guerrilla movements, even among people who did not actively support Maduro. Internal conflict could persist or intensify if governance is perceived as imposed from abroad, and the economic collapse and humanitarian strain, because long-term governance and rebuilding amid ongoing strife can delay essential services. It can deepen poverty and put pressure on basic systems like healthcare and food distribution. That can lead to much unrest. So regional spillover and external intervention Like neighboring countries, for example, like global powers, Russia, China, Colombia, they also may respond diplomatically or covertly in ways that create proxy tensions or further exacerbate the conflict.
A very good point that because of some armed groups in Venezuela as well, who would try to take advantage of this situation as the President Nicolas Maduro have been toppled by the United States. So for the ordinary Venezuelans facing uncertainty after years of hardship, what message does this moment send about the future of the Venezuelans and the country as a whole?
Well, that's also because it's a developing situation, but at the moment, it sends a very mixed and deeply consequential signal to the Venezuelan population. After years of hardship, it does bring a hope for change, but with major uncertainty. Because on one hand, many Venezuelans opposed to Maduro, they may feel relief that an end to authoritarian rule appears possible. But there's potential for a reset of political life, an end to repression and reconstruction if there's a big if in that, if a legitimate and inclusive transition, I repeat, a legitimate and inclusive transition takes place. Now we're not sure if that will happen. It also, because having a foreign nation directly govern Venezuela is, especially one that recently attacked, it can be deeply unsettling, perceived by many as occupation rather than liberation. And trust in the process, that's a huge thing. It will hinge on how inclusive and Venezuelan-led the eventual government formation is perceived to be. So rebuilding the economy, particularly the oil sector, it could eventually bring jobs and stability, but only if that process benefits Venezuelans rather than foreign companies or elites. But in the short term, the uncertainty of war, foreign governance, and economic disruption is likely to keep ordinary lives unstable. And this intervention raises questions about Venezuelan self-determination and dignity. I mean, while removal of an oppressive leader may be welcome, external control puts the future governance in the hands of foreign policymakers and interests rather than the Venezuelans themselves. So there are huge questions about the role and the future of Venezuelans in the long run, because it does look like to me it does look like a very prolonged conflict to me in the making.
Right, thank you so much, Mujib Rahman, the NPR editor from Washington, D.C.